Good day, viewers, and welcome to the Anorak Review Show with your host, the Anorak. After spending last week looking at an 80s album by a post-punk band, let's look at another 80s album by another post-punk band. This time, The. And yes, seriously, that's what that band is called. The is pretty much the brainchild of Matt Johnson, who may not be as much of a household name, but The has definitely has something of a cult following, even after 20 plus years, considering how they never made an album since like 2000 of all these years. But I'd probably go into a bit of a brief history, except there's not really too much to go into about it. So I'm just going to talk about what could be considered the most well-known album by The, which may not be saying much considering what few there are. And that would be 1986's Infected. And going off of the cover here, it's something to say the least. It has a sort of crayon-y feeling to it. Both the backgrounds of the various cities and the one planet, which I assume is Saturn. I assume this is probably on one of Saturn's moons, if that's anything to go by. And also this particular man here, who seems to be suffering a case of, I don't know, contortions, I guess, or he's suddenly getting shocked by the fact he's got two right hands. And judging by the nose strip here, he's suffering a bit of rhinitis. Yeah, I know what rhinitis is. And let me tell you, it's not most pleasant. And this little weird symbol here, which I don't know what it is. Presumably some kind of golden snitch or one relative to the golden snitch. I don't know. But as we'll hear in the music itself, a cover like this does kind of feel the overall franticness, paranoia, and, well, madness and infection that the music and lyrics would probably convey. So, let's actually listen to the music of The's Infected and see if it infects us too. We begin, of course, with the title song, and it is quite the musical jumpstart, with its industrial drums, its moody bass, its reverbed guitars, and of course the vocals of Matt Johnson himself. Here he sings about having too much energy to kind of switch off, while having not enough to get himself organized. Clearly he's in some need of some Monster Energy drink. Or rather, he's been drinking a bit much of Monster Energy drink. Either way is possible. Then in the chorus he tells us, or at least a vague person of interest, to infect him with their love. Obviously, and likely fitting considering the AIDS panic that was going on at the time in the 80s. And as Captain Planet would tell you, AIDS stink. And then later in the chorus, he tells us to nurse him into illness, then nurse him back to health. So he wants us to make him ill while curing him of his illness? I don't know. Sometimes these things can be confusing. I don't know. Then he tells us to endow him with the gifts of a man-made world. Likely referencing how sometimes we get obsessed with material things, that to the point that sometimes we just have to appreciate the people that we want to feel genuine love for. Then, partway through the song, we get a pretty cool trumpet solo, which kind of brightens the song up a bit, while still keeping up the intensity of it. Almost like the music you hear in like some 80s action sequence or something. Then later on, two lines are also worth of note. These being, from my scrotum to your womb, from your cradle to my tomb. So this is likely referring to the result of a loving relationship being producing a baby as a result of sexual intercourse, while not exactly having much love and tender care into it. So in a way, he kind of carries this kind of regret and shame to his grave, his tomb, if you will. And all in all, it's actually a very strangely deep and thought-provoking piece for what could be seen as just a 80s dark post-punk song. And political or not, it's still something worth reading into, whether you actually kind of like this music or not. Next is Out of the Blue and Into the Fire. Starting with some strange and unsettling sounds of echoey, scraping metal for the first 10 seconds or so, giving off the feeling as if we're trapped in some abandoned warehouse, so derelict and barely hanging on to any hint of life. That vibe kind of continues a bit as we're greeted by sudden guitar chords, a brief distant brass horn like a saxophone, trombone, or flugelhorn. It's kind of hard to tell which it is, and even the dropping of a ping pong ball of sorts. Yeah. Then the lyrics themselves kind of tell of a man who's implied to suffer from some kind of manic depression, and how he tries to seek out for some companionship from what's implied to be a prostitute of all people. He tries so hard to be himself, only to turn into someone else. He comes out of the blue of depression and into the fire of mania. And the music itself kind of complements that by building up from that guitar bit into some slow, soothing synth sounds, and then over halfway through by the climax we get these climactic and heavy drums, and even I think some strings as well, as a female voice says, "Come my love, into your desire," kind of heavily kind of playing into the idea of he's trying to have an actual genuine love with this prostitute person, which I think is kind of an interesting opposite in contrast to the previous track. In that he kind of seeks out the passion and sex without much love, but here he kind of seeks out some love and care without any much of sex, though ironically trying to find it in a prostitute, like I said. And it also kind of continues the themes of infections, kind of briefly mentioning the word infected in one of the verses. So it's an interesting bit of connection and continuity between songs, which I actually kind of like. After that is Heartland. This too also begins with some strange mechanical sounds, this time sounding as if this once abandoned warehouse is now slowly starting to activate and come to life, back to life, and then back to work. This is then contrasted by a light, bright, and almost honky piano, which sounds like something out of a stereotypical saloon bar or something. Then Mac Johnson comes back to sing along, this time about the kind of commenting on the condition that Britain and to an extent America were in at the time, about how welfares seem to have their hearts cut out, the poor drink the milk, and the rich eat all the honey, and I guess Winnie the Pooh is among the rich, while Tom and Sylvester are among the poor, maybe. And he goes on to anticipate how there'll be more winters of high hopes and long shadows while waiting for either a utopia or a hell to freeze over. But as we all know, when hell freezes over, the Eagles will be back together. Which is probably like a couple of times by now. But anyways, by the end of the song, the backing vocals kind of sing this phrase, "This is the 51st state of the USA," which Matt Johnson kind of joins along with. Though 51st state, I'm pretty sure that was a movie by that guy who directed Freddy vs. Jason and starring Samuel L. Jackson and Robert Carlyle. And then the whole song itself ultimately concludes with this crackly, kind of low-sounding looping of the word "state" over and over for a brief moment, almost like a vinyl record, kind of skipping and kind of going on in this skippy loop over and over, which I think is kind of clever in some way or another, trying to emulate that kind of accidental sound. And all in all, the lyrics here seem to comment on the abuse of power and how the ideas of capitalism can be exploited and taken advantage of by those who would rather keep themselves on top, even if it comes at the cost of those lesser than them, those who are more innocent and more deserving of such happiness and fortune, if not more deserving and more worthy to earn such. The side one ends with Angels of Deception, starting off with some slow and sleazy music, with Matt kind of comparing the English countryside landscape to an American western frontier range, with himself as a sort of lonesome cowboy just venturing off to the unknown. And then the pace suddenly picks up a bit with guitars and drums as Jesus weeps and dollar signs in his eyes and all. I make a joke by using that Johnny Bravo huge dollar signs clip, but potential copyright fears and all. Then it kind of quickly returns to that slow, quiet, yet very eerie mood from earlier. He kind of sings about how we dig for gold and die for pearls, probably representing how people will often do anything to seek out riches, and even if it means exploiting nature and all that. Then, after another quick chorus about Jesus weeping and dollar signs again, the music then halts for but a brief moment, giving off this sense of false closure, but before it builds up again with some plucky guitars and this chanting of angels of destruction, and it kind of picks up again at that, and it soon comes to a very quick ending to the first side. In a way, this kind of builds upon the themes of Heartland, specifically the fears of Britain and England kind of becoming dumbed down and conforming to this shallow, hollow state that it could have been, trying to be like what people see America as, this idealized land of freedom and bravery, hope and glory. But really, even America's wasn't all that perfect either back then. And after all, this was a time when Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister and Ronald Reagan was President. And of course, other albums at the time explore similar themes, such as Land of Confusion by Genesis, albeit from a more slightly lighter, more satirical way. But something like this kind of delves into that slightly more darkish, slightly maybe a bit of humor here and there, but slightly more macabre in that sense.